Good evening. My profane name is Don Webb. My sacred name is Setnakt Marin Amen Re. And I wanted to spend some time with you at your conference. However, life, as they say, had different ideas for me. Now, as a magician, at first I tend to think when things aren't going the way I want them to, at my greatest, deepest level, I call things chaotic. Really, of course, it's not chaotic. It's another order playing out its way in space and time, somewhat displacing my life. One big thing going on right now, my mom, who was born in 1922, is slowly passing away. She's leaving this earth. I visit or go home to my hometown of Amarillo pretty often. Also deal with some of the bureaucracies you have to deal with in the American way of dying. On a perhaps better way, things going on in my day job are heating up. I'm moving to become probably the director of a school and a prison, which may seem like an odd ambition, but education has always been one of my major areas of fascination, and it's one of my 3 careers. My other 2 careers are I'm a writer of fantastic fiction, have been for about 30 years, and the reason that I'm talking to you is I, of course, am a magician. It's probably fairly well known to most of you. Hopefully you've all bought copies of my books. If not, in the next few days, I'm sure you'll rectify that. All right, now, let's get on to the subjects of tonight's talk. About 2 things. I want to talk about magic, and I want to talk about morality. Morality may seem like a strange topic for the left-hand path. I was a little surprised when I presented a list of topics to the presenters of all the things I could talk about. I kind of hoped they would pick morality, but I made a list of 14 topics. This is the one they chose, which tells me one thing, that the current left-hand path in the Western world is beginning to be a bit more mature and seasoned than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Certain things come as a result of practice. Now, the first part of my talk, I'm going to talk about magic. We all have an interest, I presume, in magic. Magic is the thing that sets us apart from everyone else in the world. Now, there's some hard truths about magic. One of the hard truths is, although apparently almost every human can, to a certain extent, magic, very, very few have any talent, and even fewer want to. General is a good thing. Magic upsets the way these orders play out that I talked about at the beginning. Magic can change the orders. The orders that pattern out over our lives may be very stable, but magic has the wonderful opportunity of choosing which orders play out first, which orders play out with greater volume, which orders play out with lesser volume. The world is what it is. Magicians learn that pretty soon. I'm not going to utter a spell tonight, for example, grow wings on my back, and fly to Amarillo. Yet, I may utter a spell that gets me a lot better seat on an airplane. The practice of magic seems to be one of the defaults of the human being. There are certain things that seem to come with us just because we're human. For example, there have been any number of studies that show that young children, regardless of the way they're brought up, religious household, a non-religious household, all over the world, have the innate belief that death is not an end state. They believe that people that die go to some other state. Now, those that are taught various religious backgrounds, those that are made into Hindus or Jews or Christians, will of course see that as whatever they've been taught. That's not that interesting. What is interesting is children who are taught nothing tend to believe there's an after-death state. It's a default setting in the human consciousness. It comes with human consciousness in a strange, unique package. Now, those of us in the Temple of Set refer to that as the gift of Set, or the black flame. I'm sure several people at the conference may have very differing ways of describing that property, but there is something that sets us apart. Setting, another default of the human consciousness, is the idea that magic exists. Small children will attempt to do magical things. They will attempt to win games, influence when daddy gets home, try to put a spell on mama so they're allowed to keep the cat that followed them. Now, what's amusing about this is not a logical evolutionary move. There's no logical reason for a person to try something as irrational as, I, by will alone, will change this event. And even more strange, children have in them this innate setting that magic needs some kind of odd action, that it has its own grammar, that it's some way of communicating with the universe. Now, of course, in many cultures, children are taught magic exists. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that even a child of two atheist parents being brought up in the most logical way will attempt magic. It's part of one of the default settings of the human psyche. Now, first question, why is that default setting there? And my own feeling after being a practitioner for at least 3 decades is the default setting is there because that's the easiest way for the human being to become aware of his or her own psyche. It's that moment that creates a gap, a space, a discontinuity between the human being and the natural environment. It's not simply enough for desire to create that discontinuity. The child sees the candy bar and cries. He knows he's not experiencing union with the world. Candy bar's over there, he's over here. That, however, is not discontinuity. Discontinuity is the child then says some crazy, weird thing, and the child's mother has the desire to buy the candy bar. There's a moment where the child is aware of the fact he or she has altered the cosmos in a way that is not logically apparent. And this is the beginning of the magical path. This is the beginning of the existence of the psyche. We have to make certain decisions very shortly thereafter. The first decision we have to make is, do I use my magic to alter the world, knowing that sometimes this can really screw things up? Now, I've met some of the people at the conference, but by and large, I haven't met all of you. And yet, even though I'm not physically there, I can tell you that if you are actually magicians, you all have at least one story of a time your magic worked. It worked too well. It produced probably exactly the result you were asking for, and man, did that screw things up. Magic works upon the world in its own way, with its own rules, and we spend a lot of time learning about magic. Now, magic is the essence, the technology that unifies everyone in the room right now that's on the left-hand path. Magic is the moment where not only are we saying, I do not seek union with the universe, I do not seek union with the Godhead. Magic is the moment where you say, I am different than the universe, and I wish to apply my will to it. It is the most selfish of all moments, And yet, as I'll talk about later, it is the moment where all of the wonder, the love, the best possibilities of the left-hand path come from. Now, I have been teaching magicians in the Temple of Set ever since I became a third degree. That's the priestly degree of the Temple of Set. I achieved that in 1991. So I have a really long history of teaching magicians all around the world, some face-to-face here in Texas, some by correspondence, male, female, different ethnicities, different genders, different gender preferences, different ages. I've got a pretty large database, and I've noticed certain things. One of the things I've noticed is magic, if it does not discover its true aim, is abandoned after a few years. That's the first thing I would like to really emphasize to the people in the room. Magic has a true aim. Now, let's consider that time for you in a really spectacular way. Maybe a really deep wish that got you a job. Maybe it was the most trivial thing in the world, but it was so miraculous it took your breath away. I'm going to choose one incident from my own life to illustrate this. Now, this was long after I had taken up magical practice. This is not a great miracle. This is not a magical story that I will tell to impress other magicians. It is, however, almost perfect in a way it shows how magic plays out. Long ago, at my first conclave of the Temple of Set, I had heard that Dr. and Mrs. Aquino liked to sneak out the last day. When later I became high priest, I really understood this, because on the way out, any number of people, overcome by the emotions of this great spiritual event, run up to the high priest and tell him or her what a great time they had. It makes things as simple as walking from the hotel to the taxi somewhat of a challenge. So the high priest has long ago learned it's good to sneak out. I heard this on Sunday and realized, oh, I don't even know if the Aquinos are still here. Well, it was time for me to leave. I had packed my bags. I was riding with a couple of Setians. We were riding down the elevator to the first floor. I said, wow, I really wish I could say goodbye to Dr. and Mrs. Aquino. The elevator arrived on the first floor, the doors opened, and then closed immediately. We didn't get a chance to get out. Suddenly the elevator rose to the 14th floor, the doors opened. Who's sitting there waiting to come out? Dr. and Mrs. Aquino. We say goodbye to them because the elevator is too crowded for them to get in, and we're a bit taken aback by the whole situation. The elevator closes again, descends normally to the lobby. We go out and go our separate ways. This is a perfect example of a magical happening. My wish, uttered at the correct time, with the correct amount of passion, enabled the orders of the world to play out in a certain way. Now, why did the elevator door close and rise up? It's some simple circuit failure, some random pulse. What I later say to people, look, behold, this is my proof of magic. No, I'm sure any scientific and technical person could find a great number of reasons why this played out. What did this do for me? It indicated the magical nature of the event. It underlined everything that had just happened at conclave. And it also reminded me of the mysterious way magic works. Because most of the time when we try practical magic, we don't get results that are nearly as clear and certainly not as dramatic. But this is not the proper aim of magic. The proper aim of magic may be included in what just occurred, but we'll get back to the idea of the proper aim of magic. Early on, when the left-hand path in America was just being defined, particularly by the pioneering works of Anton LaVey, we had this wonderful volume come out called the Satanic Bible. And there in the back, there are those 3 rituals. There's the compassion ritual, the lust ritual, and the destruction ritual. As Dr. Quino once said, with all that, you are set for a week. Now, almost everyone has done one or more of those rituals. And they're all done in reaction to the world. The destruction ritual is done because somebody really pisses you off. The compassion ritual is done because you really need healing for yourself or someone else. The lust ritual is done because you want to get laid. Very much short-term goals. Now, the problem with short-term goals, those can also be the type things that lead to those mishaps we referred to earlier when I said, in fact, that everyone in the room has no doubt had that occasion of their magic working too well. Yes, I see you nodding over there. I know you know exactly what I mean. Now, these particular goals are very short-term. That doesn't mean that they're bad, that they're evil. They may be entirely the most important thing in the world. But let's consider this. Let's say you can, in fact, occasionally alter the cosmos itself through an act of magic. Firstly, isn't it lucky that you didn't have this technology during the best part of your life? For example, if I had magical technology when I was 7 years old, if indeed Set had appeared to me and said, "Behold, young Don, you can wish for anything you want in the world," I would have every Matchbox car in the world. That would be the great good at the moment. That would stop being the great good by age 9. I would regret that good through most of my life, unless those things now turn out to be super collectible. So, if I can alter the cosmos, if I can change things, what is the most important thing to change? And the answer to that is, in fact, that person in the mirror. Bringing about those qualities in yourself that manifest as virtue, as power, as understanding. Bringing about the things which, in fact, cannot be taken away from you. Your human life is temporary. You may make it longer and more comfortable by magic, but in fact, it is temporary. Yet, one of those default states of consciousness I referred to earlier, the idea there's an afterlife, makes it a fairly good idea that you want to turn your magic primarily into becoming an immortal and potent essence. In fact, you may even define the left-hand path as the process of becoming an immortal, potent, and powerful essence. You wish to influence things for a long time. Now, if you don't discover the primary use of magic, if you don't discover that magic is not about hexes and spells, but about this long-term alchemy, here's what will happen. And how do I know this? Because I have trained hundreds of magicians, and I have seen this happen hundreds of times. What invariably occurs if people don't turn their magic eventually to the purpose of self-divination, self-divining, making oneself a god. If one does not turn one's magic to that purpose, here's what happens every time. Perform magical spells, they get some good results. They then either convince themselves, well, I would have gotten this anyway, because nothing miraculous happened, which is true. Remember my story about the elevator? There's nothing miraculous about an elevator door closing, opening, or an elevator going up in a hotel. No miracles there. All everyday things. And I'm telling you this story since in this meeting, all of you have had experience with that in the last few hours. They either tell themselves, well, I would have gotten the car, I would have gotten the job, I would have gotten the girl. Maybe, possibly, magic is actually there to teach your psyche something about itself, and they give up the practice. Or They become good at practical magic, and that accelerates their accumulation of wealth and status till they become middle class and to a certain extent boring and put it aside. It was an interesting and cool thing they did in their 20s. But now they've got a real job. They don't have to do a spell to get a car. Their health is pretty good. And all their magical accoutrements are put in some shelf, ultimately to be sold off in a garage sale, given to a charity, or simply thrown away. But the people that discover the primary use of magic, people that use magic to create themselves, to bring about in themselves these desirable quantities, will continue the practice for a lifetime. Now, I have no reason to particularly urge people to take this up. There is an impulse to teach that comes along with magic, and we're going to talk about that later. However, I don't care. I am just as happy if the people that I teach magic to do pretty well for a few years, get their lives in order, and go on. They may have some warm and wonderful things to say about Uncle Setnakt, or they may think of me as just some kooky guy they met once. I don't care. I have performed the duty that I have taken into myself as a way of empowering the magic of change. Now, we're going to really come back to that idea much later in the talk when I get to morality. So I don't care, those of you sitting in the audience, if you don't take up this particular challenge and say the primary purpose of magic is self-change, self-improvement, self-creation. Now in the Temple of Set, we use an Egyptian verb for that, which we call kepher. However, that idea is certainly not bound to that culture or bound in any way to the times before, right now, and the present. All of you that are here have chosen this act of self-improvement. Think about all the things going on in the city around you now. There are people in restaurants and hospitals and bars. There are people in funeral homes and private homes and driving on the highway. There's people doing all sorts of things, people having right-hand path religious experiences, people watching reruns, people checking their Facebook. You've chosen to be here. You have already understood on some level the primary function of magic is self-improvement. You already hold that secret, and if you can keep that secret in your mind, you have become an awake individual. You will remain on the left-hand path, regardless of your affiliation, regardless of life challenges. And you will always, on some level, meet other people on that path, because people who know the secret are, in fact, to a certain extent, magnetically to each other. But we'll talk about that later, too, when I bring up the tribal impulse. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, first topic we talked about, the primary use of magic. And, good news, all of you have already discovered that one way or the other. Now I want to bring up my second topic, the effects of magic. Now, if you only use your magic as random hexes, your life will be singularly random. You will go from good to bad. Your moods will tend to become more and more bipolar. Half the time you'll be doing your destruction rituals, and half the time you'll be doing rituals for money. You will slowly spiral out of control. But if you have become consistent in making yourself the actual, obvious recipient of your magical will, your life improves in deep ways. Some of the most important life goals. The most important life goal, choice of spouse, has more to do with your happiness than anything else. Whether it's, and it has nothing to do with sexuality or choice, who your right spouse is, who your life companion is. But if you get the right one, this has the greatest effect. second most important thing, choice of livelihood, getting some way to support yourself that you feel is meaningful and causes happiness, because that's where you spend most of your time. Pretty frightening thought that for the average human, when they die, 1/3 of their time was spent at the job. And if that job was stupid, if that job was dehumanizing, or if that job was just boring, you have not succeeded as a magician. The effects of magic are always seen in the form of life improvement. Now, it does not have to be life improvement according to the society that you live in. It has to be life improvement according to you. You may not fit in very well. And in fact, one of the side effects of magic will tend to put you in the creative minority that is responsible for civilization. Magic needs the appropriate matrix. It's not going to work very well if you simply have a completely boring day job and never do anything interesting. Magic is there to create a sense of wonder. The sense of wonder is part and parcel of this work you do upon yourself. If you are pursuing your magical career correctly, the sense of wonder deepens in you. If you're not pursuing your magical career correctly, you will find you have that moment of looking back and saying, wow, I was super magical when I was 20, or I remember when weird stuff used to really happen to me, but it doesn't anymore. Boy, if you're hitting that signal, you need to change what you're doing. But here's the good news. Since you're a work in progress, that's an easy enough thing to do. So the second thing that I want to emphasize was the effects of magic should always be available to you by looking around at your life. You're always able to see my life as a whole is improving, not because my magic is outwardly going out and doing money spells all the time, because my magic is making me a more powerful individual, and a powerful and awake individual comes into better circumstances. This is not to say that everything in your life is great. Everything in your life will never be great. The chances for everything working and all aspects of your life at any time is nil. You are living in a world where there are any number of patterns that are playing out that will keep that from happening. All of you now who are meeting in Canada, as you look to the south and look at the new president we have, are aware there are a lot of patterns playing out that, in fact, you're not in control of and will have a major effect. Now that we've discussed that idea, the practice of magic brings about certain results. I want to discuss what these results mean in terms of our relationship to people in the right-hand path. Because most of you, hopefully, are already objecting, saying, well, wait a minute. I know people that aren't anyway magical, and their lives have gotten better too. Well, in fact, they are magical. They're practicing a magic that is socially conditioned. They are creating themselves according to existing patterns, and their self-creation binds them more and more into union. We call those people the right-hand path. We may notice these people. They pray and God heals their wounds. They pray and they get the good job, or they meditate, or they have no outward religious belief but have inward principles that they work upon, and yet they also receive their logical share in the universe. Well, in the right-hand path, have a function. Do not despise them. They need to be there to create the civilization of which we are and will continue to be the creative minority. If everyone were members of the left-hand path, there would be no one to wash the dishes and take out the trash. Now, the right-hand path is there because it gives us a matrix to rebel against. It gives us a substance to work against. It gives us something to overcome. Without those things, we could not do self-directed magic. All of our magic would have to be directed toward the strengthening of the social order. The right-hand path and left-hand path are ultimately cooperative systems. If they didn't do their work, our work would not be interesting. If they didn't do their work, we would not have challenges. Work, we would not have systems to draw upon and rebel against. They are absolutely necessary. From time to time, depending on your level of development, almost everyone on the left-hand path has this idea, wouldn't it be great if we just hived off and had our little monastery somewhere? Now, other than the fact that probably within a few weeks we would kill each other, no, it wouldn't be great. We need the right-hand path. I am not saying that we should view them with love, although if you can pull that one off, more power to you. I'm not saying we should view them with contempt and think of them as lower beings, because they do absolutely amazing things. If nothing else, simply preserving the work of the creative minority, the growing edge of civilization. These are ultimately always going to be cooperative systems. We cooperate with them, they cooperate with us. And this is an entirely mysterious process. Amount of what they do is in fact influenced by impulses we send into the universe. We send our impulses out, they react, they respond, either walking along as happy and hypnotized sheep, or angry people in our face, or simply it revitalizes certain aspects of the patterns that they have chosen. Now here's a very interesting thing. Almost every pattern they have that works spiritually was created by a left-hand path technician at some point. This is one of the most amazing things when you begin to study anthropology or history of religion. You will discover that the very things they do, at some point, one of us made up for them. But these ideas have now been co-opted in that everything they do is useful in maintaining the social order. Everything they do, since it's used in maintaining the social order while they live, moves them toward an afterlife state of union. Whether that really happens or whether that is just their deep faith, I don't know, and frankly don't care. I have chosen not to enter into the state of union and therefore have stopped worrying about the theology of the other 99.99% of mankind. I want to talk about a couple of other issues really quickly. One, I want to talk about the impulse to teach. It would seem, logically, that in the left-hand path, we would not want to have competition, right, if we're doing this just for ourselves. But the primary purpose of magic is not to support that surface self. It is to change the deep self. It is to change your perspective from what's going on next week to what's going on for eternity. And as this change occurs, there is a notable step in every tradition where, in fact, the person involved desires to teach. Now, at first, this may be largely fueled by ego. Man, pride works as a motivator really well until something better comes along. However, as you proceed as a magician, once you discover that primary use of magic, which is changing the self, once you begin to receive changing the self, one of the ways you participate in immortality is making sure your ideas, your magic, your tradition, your thought, your philosophy, your art, your creations of whatever kind live on. They can live on in two ways. One, you can create a right-hand path fan club that loves what you do, and every writer on the planet has tried that. The musicians, in the room where you are right now are trying that. So you can look over at Justin and Lloyd and say, my God, you guys are so great. because they want that. But there is also the form of immortality that is the living form. The living form is much more interesting. The living form, it was what happens when your changed self reaches out, interacts with the psyche of another, and produces in him or in her a sense of wonder, magical technology. So therefore, you desire to teach. Desiring to teach is another sign you're on the correct part of the path. Now, this is not something there's going to be a lot of books written about. Books are usually written for people on the early stages of the path. There's not a lot of books out there that say, so, you've become a shaman, or welcome to the devil's priesthood, or any other similar title. Maybe at some point I'll write one of those books, but I've got about 6 books I have to write before that. Yet, another consequence of magic is the desire to teach. Now, the desire to teach can take you through a certain level. Be active. It makes you seek out others. It makes you publish. It makes you create art. And you don't quite understand what this is about. Man, this would be easy to understand in the right-hand path. You would just say, oh, the Holy Spirit grabbed me and gave me this ministry. But it's very odd to do this in a path that begins in a very selfish place. Remember the very selfish moment way back earlier in this talk with the kid wanting the candy bar. Yet that desire to teach counterbalances. With the desire to teach, there comes another phase. The phase that becomes beyond this is the tribal phase. Teaching is a way of downloading certain of the contents of your own psyche to another, or in fact, taking the things you have self-created and letting them be tools for others for their self-creation. And there's a tremendous joy in this. There's a great moment when you see people fix their lives with techniques you've given them. It's always still a major thrill to me tooling around on Facebook, doing my most important life mission, which is clearly putting out pictures of cats, when in fact I get that message from someone thanking me for the Setnakt books. Now, is that pure ego? Yes, of course it is. Is that a sin? Who knows? But what's more important, I know something I have done is now living on in another living being time. If they too receive the teaching impulse, will pass that on. And I don't care if it has my name on it. I don't care if it has my serial number on it. What I care about is I have changed the world in such a way that others like me gain power, that others like me decide to become an immortal, potent, and powerful essence. This is my religious duty. Now, beyond the idea of teaching, which is often one-on-one or maybe one-to-many, the next idea that comes to people is the idea of tribe. The tribal idea. I want my tribe to live. Now, this is not a tribe in the genetic sense. There are genetic tribes, and there are people who clearly in these tribes are left-hand path practitioners. But we live in a large, multinational, multi-ethnic, postmodern society. Desire that not just our ideas live, but the matrix lives. We want to make sure a matrix remains that holds these things. Some of these may be very informal and unstructured, such as the gathering you're at right now. Some may be very formal and structured, like the Temple of Set or the Dragon Rouge. The important thing is, this is also a sign of the consequence of your magic. Your life got better, you wanted to teach. The next step is you want a tribe. This tribal material is a very important thing. With the tribe also comes a very unusual impulse. You begin to worry about the accuracy of your material. And so therefore, you look at the secret traditions. the traditions that founded you, the magic of your ancestors. You look at magic that has been repressed. People like Stephen Flowers, who can then give their whole life looking at the runes. Or Dr. Carlson, the impulse to research, but deeply connected form of the tribal impulse. Now notice the idea of becoming immortal has changed. At first, you simply wanted relief in your life. Oh, I did magic, I got relief. Then maybe you wanted your physical life to be extended, a good and great thing. Then you think, I want to live forever into the future. And then there's that very weird moment when you realize, hey, I also want to live forever into the past. And then research becomes incredibly interesting because you begin to stretch out yourself in ways you'd never defined yourself. That early defining moment of wanting that candy bar now becomes a defining moment of wanting to exist through long stretches of space and time. Now, this leads to the last thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about morality, because if we're giving out a technology that actually helps people become godlike, here's one thing I don't want. I don't want to be surrounded by a group of asshole gods. Now, the nice thing about this is the asshole ideas tend to go away because most of them are defeated very early on in the process. When you begin to realize, I want to work on myself, you will also begin to realize, I don't want to be certain types of people. It begins in a negative way. It begins with the people you cast those destruction rituals against. You're like, I don't want to be that. Well, that's a very crude way to self-define, but it's a beginning. Now, morality is an easy thing in the right-hand path. You are given a group of principles that helps you fit into a larger social order. Some of them may be tribal principles. Some of them may be health principles, like don't eat pork. Some of them may be principles about who you can have sex with or what kind of garments you can wear. But all of these principles are there to make you more of a group thinker, to support a reality wherein the idea of union is the most desirable. Morality on the left-hand path is much tougher. We don't have that idea of union. So how do we indeed cultivate, how do we seek out an idea of being good to people? Some of it comes with the path. It comes firstly with that moment of working on yourself, not for next week, but for all time, and you will become more moral. It comes when you have that impulse to teach because you will care about your students. This grows into you. This happens as a natural process. It will become even more pronounced when it becomes a tribal issue. And beyond that, there's also the logical step. If I'm interested in the survival of my tribe, I am interested in the survival of the earth. Yes, you will go through the same moral steps on the right-hand path. However, the steps aren't laid out for you. You won't have a book. You won't have a Bible. You won't have a Quran. You have to discover this within yourself. Now, why do I tell you this? I tell you this because you're the best and brightest representatives of a lot of different left-hand path traditions, and I want you to think about this. I really want you to think about the idea that, in fact, you need to begin practicing and seeking a morality early because you cannot just wait until you figure everything out. There was a time, particularly in the notion of politics, which is a form of morality, I thought, I'm going to be apolitical because I haven't gotten it all figured out yet. Well, the sad thing is some things need to happen earlier on. Lack of knowledge is never a useful excuse for lack of action. You have to accept actions. You have to even accept, I may act on this idea morally or politically and later decide it's wrong. That is exactly 1,000,000% parallel to that situation I talked about earlier, that early situation of I did a spell, my magic worked too well, it produced exactly the result I asked for it to produce, and man, did that screw it up. Yes, you will make mistakes that are moral mistakes, just like you make magical mistakes, and you will begin to understand as you refine your morality and as you refine your magic that these two things are ultimately related because they both are part of what it is to be human. They're part of this unnatural gift that we received from Set. Now, consider for this, I really wanted to come to this conference. I wanted to be there a lot. I decided, however, it's more important to take care of my mom when she's dying. Now, if I was a Christian, of course I made the right decision in the left-hand path. I have to very, very strongly come to that decision. And I can't then say to everyone else, hey, is that the right decision? Because they could only tell me if it's the right decision for them at that time. However, I know every moral decision I make is a magical decision. It affects, in a deep and wonderful way, the essence that I will become. Every moral decision leads you to becoming more powerful, more immortalized, more potent. Every moral decision leads you to becoming more of an essence. And when I say an essence, I'm meaning a force that interpenetrates the whole world, affects things far beyond just the reach of your skin, far beyond what your eyes can see or your ears can hear. For even today, right now, I'm affecting anyone in that room that's interested in hearing what I have to say, not because I'm a magician and I'm holding a medallion or waving my sacred lodestone or anything else, because I'm expecting that very special tribal moment, the moment where I am talking to people, several of which have reached the tribal stage, the stage of wanting to be sure that something remains, that a matrix happens in which teaching can occur. Now, I think the fact that you've all gathered, and I think particularly the work that Helene and Justin have done by making this happen, and a lot of people whom I don't know, who I'm sure have worked their butts off to make this happen, is a deeply wonderful thing. They have all been rewarded in the sense that now they've been exposed to all these ideas. They've created a huge amount of dialogue. They have done the tribal thing. And by doing that, I can tell where their level of development is. They are not at the level of development of, I'm just casting a spell to hex my neighbor because he woke me up at night. They're not at the level of development of, I am just doing some work to improve me. They're not even at the level of development of, I want to teach. They're at the level of development of a tribal way. This is the way the left-hand path will survive. We need to understand this. We need to acknowledge this. We need to fine-tune our thoughts to this. We need to fine-tune our magic to this, because the world is not happy with us. Even though the left-hand path and right-hand paths are entirely cooperative systems, we have the advantage of knowing they're cooperative systems. The other side is frankly just too stupid to know that. And sadly, it's probably always going to be. Now, we have gone through some interesting things tonight. We have talked about how magic and morality are related. We have come to see that magic is itself the defining characteristic of the left-hand path, and we've come to see that the consequences of magic can be predicted regardless of the initiatory names we give them, regardless of what kind of diagrams we use to explain degrees and titles. These things are there. They are real. They are part and parcel of the human condition. It's a natural part of the human condition, this black flame that we celebrate. This is an amazing thing. This is something that should produce in your minds as great an ecstasy as a Christian singing hymns. It will take a long time to do this, but I hope that some of you come back to this idea again and again. Now, I am so sad that I cannot be with you. I am now going to have to go and deal with some of the basic life issues that are keeping me here in Texas right now. But before I leave, I want to thank everyone at the conference for their attention to my words. Please talk about the idea of morality. Please talk about the idea of magic is the defining characteristic of the left-hand path. Please talk about the idea that the ultimate and primary use of magic is the improvement of the self. And even if you disagree with me violently, please talk about the ideas, because there's some great power that's about to be unleashed in the world because of these ideas. Some of that power is going to be unleashed this year on the birthday of Set, when Judith Page and I release our new book, Set. Some of it's going to be released by certain actions done at a Temple of Set conclave, but a lot of it's being released by you people right now, and this is a very exciting moment. So I say to all of you good night, and I leave you with this thought. Great is the might of Set, and greater still is he through you. Thank you.